Start back where you started before.
You mean about the first Technical Alliance office?
Yeah, and what's this book? What's the name of it?
It's called Thorsten Veblen and His America, and it's the only biography that's been written about Veblen.
What is the name of it?
Thorsten Veblen and His America.
Thorsten Veblen and His America. By whom?
By Joseph Dorfman.
Joseph Dorfman or Dorfman?
Dorfman.
Dorfman.
Yeah.
No, I haven't read it. And what does he contend that Veblen?
Well, he just when he talked about Veblen's activities in the New School, he said that after Veblen wrote the articles that were later published as Engineers in the Price System, which was in 1919, I guess, that he published those articles. He started a group at the New School with a few people sort of on the side. He was giving a course, I guess, or a couple of courses, and this group was supposed to discuss the problems that he had brought up in the Engineers in the Price System, the problem of plan control.
Well, it's not correct in substance or in fact. The Technical Alliance was in existence before the New School, and before I ever met Veblen. And the articles in the Dial magazine, and that was edited at the time by Helen Marat. It later became a poetry magazine.
Yeah.
Now, those articles were later published in book form as the Engineers in the Price System. But those articles were written in the Dial as a result of dinner luncheon conferences with myself and several others, and nothing to do with the New School whatsoever. And in fact, I met Veblen at the old faculty club, Columbia University, and I was taken up there and introduced to Veblen, Marjuni, Cal, and a whole lot more by Montgomery Schuyler and Merrill Rogers. Merrill Rogers at that time was a advertising manager of the New Republic and a husband of Joy Young, the suffragette. You might have to turn that up just a point or so. A little. That's better? Yeah. Right. And we were engaged in this before the New School existed, you see.
What were you doing at that, and when you first started, what kind of projects were you doing in the Technical Alliance?
Research on resources and areas and so on.
Was it an independent thing? You weren't...
Purely independent.
Yeah.
In other words, I bought the furniture and equipped 2 floors at 107 Waverly Place with my own money, and then the engineers and scientists and technologists that I had associated with me in World War I, they went out of work, you see. And a whole lot of them bunked in there and worked a day or two and go look for work or write letters for the rest of the time.
And what about the association with the IWW? Was that later?
Oh, that was way later as the Technical Alliance. See? Our association was simply that we undertook to provide them information on several industries, but our bigger job was with the Railroad Brotherhood. They don't say anything about that.
No, I haven't come across that at all.
Oh yeah, that's typical of when they want to mess up something. No, I never was a member of the IWW.
No, it just, I guess it was mentioned in newspaper articles that you did a research project for the IWW.
Well, we did for Jet Lout, the economist in Washington, D.C., and the Railroad Brotherhood. Now, what we supplied was information on the structure of the meatpacking industry, the copper, and the agricultural. See, what we pointed out to them that in the report is that they were attempting to organize the migratory worker, and that there were about 1,200 combines in Kansas at the time. And we pointed out the migratory worker wouldn't exist in a few years when you got 15,000 migratory workers, or combines. Well, the combines went to about 27,000, and there were no migratory workers. Now, up until that meeting in the faculty club, now that's long before the new school.
Was that in 1918 still?
That's the winter of 1918. Fall of 1918. I had never met Veblen, I never read him. Now, Veblen, his association with the new school was through the, Mrs. Whitney put up the $5,000 a year for simply to keep Veblen.
Do you know what kind of course he was giving at that time?
Oh, he was
What concern?
Somewhat similar to what are in his books. What would you call it? What? Look out. Goes over on tape. Yeah? What are you doing?
More volume.
Well, that would be simply when I turn, see, when I turn away from the mic, you see, you got it up too high now. Huh? Just that when I turn away from the mic, this is so sensitive. Pardon me, go ahead with that question.
What kind of course? I think Dorfman said that Veblen gave a course in which he treated the ideas that he used in those dial articles.
Oh, no, not at all.
He didn't.
No. And then he wrote this cockeyed thing about the Soviet technicians, which we jumped him for. Yeah? He had no more idea, Veblen had, of a technological structure than Susie Q on Broadway did. Yeah? I mean, he had an inquiring mind, and he had a interesting sense of humor, but he wasn't trained from the technical side. I think I'm the only person that ever kept Veblen up till after 3 o'clock in the morning. He stayed at my place, along with all the others, till after 3 in the morning.
And did you discuss the idea of the?
Well, we had a series of dinners and luncheons. Some were at the Columbia Club, that's the downtown, on 43rd Street. And, what was the name of Robinson? He came and sat in the corner. He was a professor, and he wrote The Mind in the Making from taking notes at the meeting.
Oh, his name is Robinson?
Huh?
Robinson?
Robinson, I can't think of his first name. The Mind in the Making is the name of the book.
And did you keep, was the Technical Alliance in existence all the way through the 20s?
Pardon?
Was the Technical Alliance in existence all through the 20s?
Oh, yeah.
And it was doing active research all through the 20s?
It went up and down in its activities, but nothing spectacular.
And how did you come to be associated with Columbia University?
We never were associated with Columbia.
What about the energy survey? I mean, you know,
Well,
like,
yes, we had other space besides Columbia University. We had the big drafting room, the huge ones of Voorhees, Camille, and Walker at 101 Park Avenue. Well, then Dr. Rottenstad, who was Dean of Industrial Engineering, they didn't have any students in that whole building. And he said, well, they're empty. We got drafting table. We got some calculating machines. And I had all these engineers, you know, and draftsmen and so on that were on relief. And the engineering societies asked me what could you do with them? You couldn't get them out to sell apples. And I said, well, we can give them a research job to do. And they said, you can? And I said, yes. And we wound up, you know, with around 250 of them. Now, Rottenstad did it on his own.
oh, it was independent of the university then?
Well, I don't know how he did it. He said, you can have the floors here in the Industrial Engineering Building. He had an office. Now, King Hubbard, Dr. King Hubbard, who was one of our men, he was teaching geophysics at Columbia. Have you heard of him at all?
Yes, I have.
Well, he had lunch with Rottenstad, and Rottenstad, he was telling Rottenstad about the project, and Rottenstad suggested that I come up there and look the place over, and I could have the floor or 2 floors. And that's what started it. But we had other space beside Columbia, see? And Columbia University never had anything to do with either the supplies or the direction of it. They were interested. Now, what have you found out of the reason at Columbia University? They claim they...
Well, it's very confused. They claim that well, when the big publicity first broke in August, I guess it was, in 1932, right?
That's but we were in
That was announced by Columbia, wasn't it?
Well, that's what I want to get, see what you've done in your research. Now, the Nicholas Murray Butler's political campaign manager and the head of the School of Journalism, or one of them, suddenly found out that Columbia had a big research project underway. That is in Columbia University. So without consulting with us at all, they drew up a release to the press and sent it out apparently on Saturday for release Monday. They knew how to do it, you see, because Monday's your bad day. If you can really hand the press anything, they'll give it front page. Well, we knew nothing about it till we arrived up there at the engineering building, and you had 40 reporters and sound trucks and movie tone sound news and all the rest. That's what started it. They didn't consult us at all. We didn't have any publicity staff or to handle it.
Were you planning any specific publicity for any time in the future?
No,
You just
we
wanted
weren't
to keep
interested
on-
in publicity. We were interested in doing a job, which is the analysis of the energy determinants of the continent. Our approach was an entirely different one. Certainly it's radical and revolutionary.
And then this just forced you to
Well, it landed us in the midst of this publicity, which we didn't originate, and we couldn't, at the time, control. Now, we called our body of thought, and this was way back in the Technical Alliance, we called it Technocracy. Way back in 1919.
What about Smith's contention that he invented the word technocracy?
Technocracy has been invented by at least 7 or 8, but never in the sense that we use it. Now, he also was in New York, and he used to come into a restaurant in Greenwich Village where he heard the discussions on it. And he wrote an article in an engineering magazine using the word technocracy as an efficiency system.
Oh, he used it in a completely different sense then.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it's been used way back by 1884 and 1889 and 1860 something. But never in the sense in which we used it.
There was also a lot of discussion at the time, in the 30s, about the influence of Sadi's work. Had you read that before?
Sadi hasn't anything to do with it. See, Sadi, of course, gave a very nice newsreel interview, and he was glad that they had hoped to bring out technocracy
In
in
England,
Britain,
yeah.
the scientists. But he's glad that it was done in the United States. They had Fox Movietone News. I'll give you a lead. You can look that up if you want to.
I'm not sure they have those in the libraries. I don't know where you'd get that, do you?
Well, that'll be in the newsreel library. They have them way back. We did have a copy of it, but in moving out here, we don't know what happened to it.
Did you have any further relations with Veblen during the 20s, or was he just in those first discussions?
No, in that period,
In the early
he personally became interested in what we're doing, yes. But I'm just trying to clarify
Yeah.
the original situation. Yeah.
That's
And
really
this Montgomery Schuyler, see, he had been head of the testing laboratory in the city of St. Louis. Well, he later, he did some work for several organizations in Encyclopedia Britannica. And then in 33, the Roosevelt administration gathered up, all the technocrats and ex-technocrats they could lay their hands on.
You mean to work in the government?
Yeah. Well, Leon Henderson was price administrator. Leland Olds was federal power administrator. Have you ever seen the Technical Alliance Bulletin?
No, I couldn't get a hold of anything before.
Our sections across the country have one in every section.
I haven't been able to find any of them before 1935 or something like that.
Well, they haven't set Wayne Parish, look, it should be in. What's happened to it again? Good God, you leave it in here. What is the matter with these people? What's Wayne Parish for? You know what I'm talking about?
Yes. Probably that one from the file.
Shouldn't be in any of that stuff, it should be left in the book.
Can I find out from you if there's a section in Boston or around Boston that I could...
No, there isn't. We
There
have
isn't.
some members in Low Down and New Hampshire. We have a unit in St. John's, New Brunswick. We have members in Newfoundland. I can take you over in the house later and show you. We got some photographs of sections all up on the wall. And we're strongest, you see, in the central manufacturing area of the United States. And out on the Pacific coast and in Western Canada. I spoke in Boston several times. Now this is kind of getting yellow around the take a look at those names. That was the original committee of the TA. Mm-hmm. Let me just lay this down so I can see it. Ackerman was the architect, Cornell University and other big buildings. Dr. Alsberg was chief chemist of the Bureau of Agriculture. Alan Carpenter was doctor and surgeon in New York. Comstock was head of the Comstock engineering firm, still the biggest electrical contractors in New York. They did all the electrical work at the World's Fair. Mm-hmm. Stuart Chase, you know.
Yeah.
Well, Stuart Chase, when I met him first, was an accountant in the Federal Trade Commission in Washington. I pulled him out of that when he wrote his first article in the office of the Technical Land.
Oh, really?
Yes. And he worked on the Railroad Brotherhood Report. Alice Bowers Fernandez, Dr. Bowers was Deputy Commissioner of Education in the United States, Department of Education in Washington. Bassett Jones, electrical engineer, was a member of the firm of Meyer, Strong and Jones, consulting to General Electric, Otis Elevator, and co-inventor and developer with Clarence Birdseye of Frosted Foods.
Really?
Does that, my voice come over all right, huh?
Good.
Robert H. Cohn was, what was the official name? Was it the American Institute of Architects? Anyway, he was president of the Institute of Architects. Benton Mackay, when I first met him, was in the Department of Forestry. I pulled him out of that. His brother was Percy Mackay, the dramatist and the poet.
I don't think I've heard of him.
Oh yeah, he's on Broadway. Benton Mackay later went on to lay out and publicize. He's the creator of the Appalachian Trail. Leland Olds, statistician, then he became secretary of the New York State Power Authority. And Roosevelt made him Federal Power Administrator. Charles P. Steinmetz, of course, was General Electric. Tolman, Dr. Tolman, was, at this time, was head of the Fixed Nitrogen Research Laboratories in Washington, D.C. He became Dean of Physics of Caltech. He's the one that taught Oppenheimer and all the rest of them. And in the war, he was atomic representative of the Combined Chiefs of Staff for the United States and Great Britain and co-administrator with Vannevar Bush of All Your Science. John Carroll Vaughan was the great surgeon, head of the Vanderbilt Clinic. Thorsten Veblen, you know, Whittaker was editor of the Architects Institute Journal. So you have quite a collection of stuff. Now, when you're at it, you got it right there. See what Roosevelt did was he grabbed off everybody that had any association with technocracy, either in some way or other. Leon Henderson was made price administrator Leyland Olds was made power administrator. Now, what's his name? He and Stuart Chase did most of the work of our report to the Railroad Brotherhood. Can't get his name now, and I want it. He became Deputy Chief of ODT, Office of Defense Transportation, during the war.
Who was the person who took the name of Frank Arkwright to write the book?
Oh, that's, I can't think of the name. He was in the Harper and Company.
Because I read somewhere that he was a well-known journalist, but no one ever said who he was.
Oh, he was one of the top men in Harper and Company publishers. See? We lent him books, and we spent $92 additional, and buy him additional books to read up on it. And I didn't have time to write.
Now, what happened in 1933 when you left Columbia, and I guess you went back to the offices, or just used the offices on Park Avenue then?
Yeah, we were using that. Then we had an office on Madison Avenue, and then we had an office on 3rd Avenue, and then we moved into the Commerce Building, where we stayed, let's see, from 37 to 1950. How many years is that?
13?
Yeah, 13, 14 years.
Mm-hmm.
And we left the Commerce Building and came out here and bought this farm. Yeah.
Well, was there as the newspapers played it up, there was a big feud or a big split between you and the people at Columbia?
No. What happened was that the National Society of Arts and Sciences gave this annual dinner, which they usually give. And the dinner was held at the Hotel Pierre with a radio hookup clean across Canada and the United States and shortwave to the world. Well, the pressure was on, and Rautenstrauch had agreed to introduce me with 5 minutes of introduction. Then he wanted, that is, they arranged that 2 months or something before. And then he comes through and wants 20 minutes to explain what his position is. See, Leon, you'll find it in the Herald Tribune, where Leon Henderson and a couple more, we asked them to resign, and they resigned.
Yeah, I remember that.
Well, and of course they thought they were going to take the research away from technocracy. Well, they didn't do any such thing. And one group offered Rautenstrauch $250,000 endowment to continue the research, and they also offered him the position of being head of the Industrial Conference Board. But then he declined that when he found out that he would sacrifice his university pension if he took it. Besides, as Dean of Industrial Engineering at Columbia, he had 3 or 4 very nice industrial consulting accounts, which as a university professor he could hold. But as head of the Industrial Conference Board, he couldn't. He'd have to relinquish those. And his income from the consulting accounts were higher than that of his salary at Columbia University. It's all very complicated, see?
So he stayed at Columbia then?
Pardon?
He stayed at Columbia.
Oh, yes, see? So he resigned, one that was at Columbia that still remained with us was King Hubbard, and one or two lesser individuals.
What did you think of the reactions of the bankers and the people who became very interested in the
Well, that
technology?
was typical, you see. They didn't know what it was, and the press broke it.
Yeah.
Well, then they went for it. Well, then when they discovered that it was really radical and revolutionary. In other words, we consider communism so far to the right that it's bourgeois. See? Well, instinctively, they were correct. Their instincts were. They didn't know what it was. But when it dawned on them, what we were designing was something far more revolutionary than socialism or communism or fascism. See? And then they flipped right over. See, they proposed to us that they set up a committee of 100 and would endow us with plenty of money if they could edit anything we turned out. We declined the platinum handcuffs. Maybe we should have taken the money. Yeah? I wouldn't say that we were necessarily correct in one sense. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. There was mention of, in some of the articles I read, of a specific sort of propaganda campaign after the publicity broke around in January.
Whose campaign?
Well,
By whom?
by Technocracy Incorporated.
No, we
Was
went
it-
on a speaking tour across the country and we organized sections.
Mm-hmm.
That was 34.
That was much later then, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But you see, you have to get the picture straight. The Roosevelt administration set up this National Potential Product Capacity Survey. And they grabbed off Montgomery Schuyler and Felix Fraser and some more. And they started a right deviation known as the Continental Committee on Technocracy.
Oh, that was a separate organization?
Yes, we had a Continental Committee, but they grabbed the name. Now, we applied for incorporation in 1932, but the political interference delayed the issuing of the charter until 1933. And that was only done because the firm of attorneys threatened to issue a writ of mandamus on the Secretary of State in Albany, New York, to show just cause as to why it shouldn't be. And it came forthwith in a hurry. Our attorneys were Cadwallader, Wickersham, and Taft. Strange bedfellows. It really is. There's a lot of interesting stuff involved in all this.
And what was the name of the Roosevelt administration thing that you just mentioned?
The National Potential Product Capacity Survey. Now, they were put on the federal payroll to make this survey. And they went out across the country speaking on Continental Committee of Technocracy. And they had some financial backing beside the federal government. Now, we stopped it because Harold Loeb was also on this National Potential Product. He never was a member of Technocracy. Mm-hmm. He wrote Life Under Technocracy, and we refused to approve it, and 3 or 4 big publishers turned it down because we were... But he was employed on the federal payroll. Well, he and Felix Fraser went out speaking across the country, and they got a professor at Marquette University, and and somebody up in Denver, and then a woman up in Seattle, a woman lawyer. When he got to Canada, we found out what their federal payroll numbers were and sent their federal payroll numbers to Canada. They had crossed the boundary line. You can't cross the boundary line as a government employee of either Canada or the United States, vice versa, and speak on another subject. That's contrary to the law. So they were stopped. And the Continental Committee was closed up by the Postal Department. Post Office, United States Post Office later. Now, that was in 1933 that they did this, right after Roosevelt took office, you see. And that National Potential Product Capacity Survey was under the chairmanship of Langdon Post. And Langdon Post married, what was the millionaire cartoonist? He only had one child, a daughter, and Langdon Post married the daughter.
Hirschfeld? Hirschfeld?
Pardon?
Hirschfeld?
I can't hear you, my dear.
Hirschfeld, the one who does the New York Times cartoons.
No. Oh, he was one of the first cartoonists in strip comic thing. When he made $1 million or so out of it, a couple of million. Who did, I can't think of it right now. Langdon Post married his daughter. And Langdon Post gave me a dinner at this apartment on Park Avenue, which was attended by Walter Lippmann, Roy Howard, Ken Cooper of the Associated Press, and a whole slew more. See, we were naive. We didn't know who the political hucksters were, you know. Very interesting, because we had to get educated too, but not in what we were doing, but in what we had to battle. We could design any kind of scientific or technical engineering apparatus, but our contact were not with the political, financial.
Did you have any trouble with the socialist and communist organizations at that time?
Very, very little. They later attacked us. The two chief attacks were the Communist Party, some socialists, and the Roman Catholic Church. In fact, the Roman Catholic Church lifted, there was a series in the Daily Work, the Mass, what was it? What was the communist paper in New York?
It's the Worker now.
The Worker, it was a Worker, in which they had photographs, and they attacked us, trying to make out we were fascists, you see. Well, the Catholic press reprinted that thing, comma for comma, never once admitting that they took it from the communist press, and published it simultaneously in 47 diocesan papers. And yet a year before, the Jesuit Catholic America had advised every Catholic engineer to join technocracy. That's before the flip over. But there aren't many Catholic engineers, you know, or scientists. Relatively few. In fact, the smallest percentage, Jewish have quite a high percentage of mathematicians and so on, but your Catholics out. They go in for law and.
Do you think that's because a lot of them go to
Pardon?
Catholic universities?
Pardon?
Do you think that's because a lot of them go to Catholic universities?
I can't hear you, my dear.
Do you think the reason for that is that a lot of Catholics go through Catholic universities and they probably don't?
Well, your old university in Europe.
Yeah.
You see what? They went in for the arts, for history, for law and logic, but not science. And you're the same way here. Well, they try to pick it up and modernize it here, but it isn't comparable to a modern engineering college.
What do you think was the total effect of all the publicity in 1932 and 33? Do you think it was bad for your organization, or?
Bad and good, depending on how you view it. If we had had a big office staff and a publicity, we could have handled it, but we only had one typewriter. And when mail poured in the thousands and telegrams by the thousand, you simply didn't have the facilities to handle such a mass impact. And the press was running wild. So was every writer and everything else. See, Stuart Chase wrote a book right at that time. Well, he didn't come to us, but he had 3 chapters or more on technocracy. When the publishing company called us up, and he had to take the 3 chapters out.
He did write a short pamphlet on it.
Oh yes, and he went on a speaking tour across the country, and the big speaking tour agency publicized it. $2 and a half.
But that activity was approved by
No.
by you? Oh, what?
Oh no. These people, everybody stepped into the act, you see, to get aboard the gravy train. And we had nothing to do with it. Well, they had a wonderful time for about a couple of years. See, when they flipped over to the attack side, then they tried to bury us. See, the technocracy's really been dead, you know, we're zombies.
I know. I remember reading in I think it was a book by a couple of communists who claimed that the communist press was what stamped it out. They claimed that the communist press.
Oh, they all claimed that.
Oh, yeah.
They never stamped it out. See? In other words, we didn't have any endowments or rich angels. We didn't have subsidies from foreign governments like the Communist Party. So we've existed on our own. Membership dues, our literature. And at the time of the publicity, we were only a relatively small group. Well, today we're spread out across the continent.
How many members do you have now?
We never make any statement on membership. Never have and never will. And not just the same as when we introduce anybody on the platform. We do not engage in eulogy of who he or she is. Just that they're an officer or director or so on of technocracy. But we have our own printing plant. We own some nice section buildings. We have some little section headquarters. We have some that are as large as a supermarket, all depending on where it is. And you have to have 50 members to be chartered as a section with 11 Board of Governors, and they're elected every year. The Continental Board of Governors are 12, and 3 are elected every, so there's a 4-year term.
Are you still engaged in the same survey? You're not still engaged in the same survey that you were engaged in the energy survey?
Well, it's all energy determinants, you see. In other words, what was the picture? Not a financial picture, but the physical picture. Well, we've been proven correct. We came out 40 years ago, and we stated that the farms of the United States would decline in numbers and increase in size. We also wrote a report on the iron ore, hematite ore, and the masaba, that the viable, economic feasible ore of the masaba, that the Fe content would decline as a function of depth, I'm quoting now, and that the Si, silicon, would increase as a function of depth, and that the economic feasible ore would be exhausted by 1950 if there was the same continuous growth of consumption in the steel industry of the United States. Well, of course, the Depression held it down, and she didn't kick off till World War II again, you see. But masaba is gone right now. And copper, we're in a sad way because practically all the copper mined in the United States is 0.8% or less. Our lead and zinc, our petroleum, we're only doing 11 barrels per well per day. And we've been kidding ourselves that we find new reserves. But Iran, for instance, their barrels are 10,000 barrels per well per day, not 11. See, what we contended then was that machines made jobs for machines, and only machines could produce machines. And if you kept on installing energy-consuming devices, you would finally arrive at the point where you would not require the services of the majority of the able-bodied adults in the United States to produce and distribute the physical wealth. It would be done by a minority. Now, that statement is decades old. See? Now, this is fundamental stuff, which they don't want to deal with in the propaganda against us. Now, of course, they're announcing from Moscow that the new administration in Moscow are technocrats. Yeah, Marvin Kolb on CBS from Moscow. The technocrats have taken over in Moscow. Well, it's nonsense. The idea did go abroad in the 30s. And you had, with no help from us and no affiliation, you had the Deutsche Technokratische Gesellschaft formed in Germany, and a number of prominent German scientists and engineers, and they published a Technocracy magazine, good paper, good photographs. You had the Czechoslovakia Technokraty, Spolenz, published in the Engineering Institute in Prague, and the Niederländische Technokratie, Verband, and the Hague in Holland, and the Norska something or other in Norway, and in Sweden, and wait a minute, in Belgium, you had this chap ran as a technocrat, and he scored more votes than the fascist Ruxus de Grelle. Now in Italy, Mussolini started off first. He arrested 27 engineers, scientists, and threw them into imprisonment in La Paris. That's a prison now. One of them was the son of the Consul General, Italian Consul General of Switzerland. To give you an idea. Well, when the Allies liberated La Paris, they took him over to North Africa. And lo and behold, they weren't soldiers, so they didn't receive the status of military prisoners. And there they were, darn near starving to death in North Africa in Allied hands. They weren't soldiers, they were political prisoners. Well, when Hitler came into power, he promptly squashed the Deutsche Technocracy, Gesellschaft. And when he took over Czechoslovakia, the Technokratie Smolensk, Czechoslovakia was, some of them escaped, some of them died. And right now in France you have the, just trying to think of his name, you have this organization that even carries our literature on their list in France. And they broadcast every once in a while, and they publish it. There are two organizations. One's political and the other isn't. L'Abondance.
The movement
for the
abundance.
Movement for abundance. And Dubois, is it?
I think so.
Jacques Dubois is the head of it. So it survived even the war and the but please understand that we had no part in this setting up of any of that, just mushroom as part of it. We've never had any contact with the Russians, and so we don't know anything about that. But to say that there are technocrats in Russia or in France under de Gaulle is nonsense.
Well, do they mean it specifically in reference to this movement, or just using
Well,
the
they're
word
using the
and-
term, you see, that planning and design. Anything that's of national design now is synonymous with technocrats and technocracy, you see. Of course, it's incorrect to use it that way, but that's partly done to confuse it, especially when they're French Catholic writers. Well, you ask me some more questions.
Do you have any ideas on how soon the technological unemployment will really reach,
Well, it isn't only unemployment, you see.
or just
Let me see if I can give you a picture. In 1920, John L. Lewis had 780,000 bituminous coal miners. Today, he only has 235,000. Now, true, John L. Lewis and the coal operators have raised the coal mining per man to the highest in the world, 8 to 14 tons per man. But the new machines coming in do 8 tons a minute. In other words, John L. Lewis isn't going to have 235,000 very much longer. Your American railroads had 2,140,000 in 1920. It's now down to less than 800,000, including station employees.
what about the federal program to retrain people who are like in the coal mining districts in Virginia and whatnot? They're retraining them.
Look, my dear, the trouble with all of this is that any philosophic approach, any moral approach, any humanitarian approach is invalidated utterly and completely by the technological progression of the next 30 minutes. That is what they cannot see. They're thinking in terms of dollars and economics and balance sheets when it's a physical problem. Now the consolidations of railroads that are coming up will trim another 200,000 employees out. Well, there'll be no future for the youth of America in railroading, coal mining, chemicals, cement. You can go on down the line. Your ideal cement company today has beautiful new plants in which are operated by tape, and there's only one man per shift required to operate a giant cement plant. Now the same thing is hitting your white-collar workers now. The steel workers have lost 200,000 employees in the last 10 years. And they're now firing 5,000 to 8,000 white-collar, no longer required. This is the kind of material you're looking for, is it?
Well, what
See,
about...
we brought this out years ago.
Yeah. What about...
And we were considered a little crazy. You see, oh, it'll never happen in our time. Maybe sometime, but not in our time. Well, it's happening.
What about the idea that people who were put out of work completely by technological improvements would be absorbed in new industries which are just developing?
No, you did it temporarily in the services the last 15 years. Commission selling, advertising, publicity, welfare, all the services did increase several times, you see. And that glossed the real situation over because it appeared to be a factor of stabilization by absorbing, but that has stopped. And your new industry today has technological equipment never dreamed of 20 years ago. The Russians are running into the same thing. You're running into it in Britain. British unemployment is rising. It'll be 750,000 to 1 million by June.
But has the unemployment rate really risen substantially in this country?
It's risen,
It
but then
fluctuates.
our unemployment figures, man, see? Only those are registered as unemployed who are drawing unemployment compensation. All those who came out of school and never had a job are not registered. And those who have run out of their compensation. Now, we have several million people holding 2 and 3 jobs. And that's recorded as each job is recorded. Well, but you've got 2.5 million people. Now that's a misnomer. It gives a fictitious total. The Canadian or British statistics are much more reliable than those of the United States.
Do you have information on the difference between the figure that's
The what?
the figure that's drawn up from the unemployment compensation rolls and the real figure of unemployment? Do you know?
Well, the real figure would run near 8% in the United States. If you're including those who are washed out, and those that are looking for work but have never had a job.
Can't they account for them by people who are on relief and whatnot? Wouldn't they be counted that way?
Well,
Someone who's on relief
that
and-
cushions the effect. But then they're not getting sufficient money to purchase the increasing production. You see, your physical output is rising with less and less man hours all the time and less employment. Take this last year, 62. Well, what happened? The production went up, but your manufacturing employment in the United States did not increase. Steel production for 1962 is barely 400,000 tons more than 1961. in spite of all the money pumped into the economy. And we didn't make these figures.
Now, do you have any specific ideas on what will happen, say, in the next 10 years,
Oh, yeah.
based on your...
See, the moment that your energy consumed per capita rises to a certain figure, then you no longer can employ the majority of working adult. In other words, you can produce abundance and distribute it with a minority of your working population. Well, then you'll have to pay everybody, whether they work or not, the same amount. It's going to be rather complicated under this social system, isn't it?
Did you foresee the crash in 1929?
Oh, yeah.
Do you think there'll be another?
Not of the same
Thing.
kind. No, in July 1932, I predicted that the banks of the United States would close on or before April 1933. And the Attorney General of the United States under Hoover wanted to move for my indictment on the basis that I was making statements inimical to the safety of public institutions. And on the last, February? 1933, I was speaking. I was the first speaker on the platform of the National Education Convention in the big auditorium in Minneapolis. And Dr. Glenn Frank, who was then president of the University of Wisconsin, was to follow me on the platform. Well, I made the same statement. And when I got back to the Curtis Hotel, the mayor of Minneapolis and the district attorney and attorney general were all there. Here I had made statements because people started going out of that auditorium like this. I asked them if they had a return ticket and if they had any money in the bank to wire home to withdraw the money. And they really came up with intentions of arresting me. The only thing that stopped it was the manager of the hotel called up the suite and says, "Mr. Scott, the extras have just hit the street. The governor of Ohio has closed all the banks in Ohio." The difference in time between Columbus, Ohio and Minneapolis, that did it. I said, "Send up 100 copies." You get the picture of the Roosevelt administration with all these people in it. I'm still trying to think of, what's his name, that ODT. He was engineer for the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad when we drive. You start back where you started before.
You mean about the first Technical Alliance office?
Yeah, and what's this book? What's the name of it?
It's called Thorstein Veblen and His America, and it's the only biography that's been written about Veblen.
What is the name of it?
Thorstein Veblen and His America.
Thorstein Veblen and His America. By whom?
By Joseph Dorfman.
Joseph Dorfman or Dorfman?
Dorfman.
Dorfman.
Yeah.
No, I haven't read it. And what does he contend that Veblen?
Well, he just when he talked about Veblen's activities in the new school, he said that after Veblen wrote the articles that were later published as Engineers in the Price System, which was in 1919, I guess, that he published those articles. He started a group at the new school with a few people sort of on the side. He was giving a course, I guess, or a couple of courses, and this group was supposed to discuss the problems that he had brought up in the engineers in the price system, the problem of plan control.
Well, it's not correct in substance or in fact. The Technical Alliance was in existence before the new school, and before I ever met Veblen. And the articles in the Dial magazine, and that was edited at the time by Helen Marat. It later became a poetry magazine. Now, those articles were later published in book form as the Engineers in the Price System. But those articles were written in the Dial as a result of dinner luncheon conference.
Robinson?
Robinson, I can't think of his first name. The Mind in the Making is the name of the book.
And did you keep, was the Technical Alliance in existence all the way through the 20s?
Pardon?
Was the
I can't hear you.
Was the Technical Alliance in existence all through the 20s?
Oh, yeah.
And it was doing active research all through the 20s?
It went up and down in its activities, but nothing spectacular.
And how did you come to be associated with Columbia University?
We never were associated with Columbia.
What about the energy survey? I mean, you know,
Oh, yes, we had other space besides Columbia University. We had the big drafting room, the huge ones of Voorhees, Gamel, and Walker at 101 Park Avenue. Well, then Dr. Rautenstahl, who was Dean of Industrial Engineering, they didn't have any students in that whole building. And he said, well, they're empty. We got drafting table. We got some calculating machines. And I had all these engineers, you know, and draftsmen and so on that were on relief. And the engineering societies asked me, what could you do with them? You couldn't get them out to sell apples. And I said, well, we can give them a research job to do. And they said, you can? And I said, yes. And we wound up, you know, with around 250 of them. Now, Rautenstraud did it on his own.
Oh, it was independent of the university then?
Well, I don't know how he did it. He said, you can have the floors here in the Industrial Engineering Building. He had an office with myself and several others. And nothing to do with the new school whatsoever. And in fact, I met Veblen at the old faculty club, Columbia University. And I was taken up there and introduced to Veblen, Marge, Cal, and a whole lot more by Montgomery Schuyler and Merrill Rogers. Merrill Rogers at that time was a advertising manager of the New Republic and a husband of Joy Young, the suffragette. You might have to turn that up just a point or so. A little. That's better? Yeah. Right. And we were engaged in this before the new school existed, you see.
What were you doing at that, and when you first started, what kind of projects were you doing in the Technical Alliance?
Research on resources and areas and so on.
Was it an independent thing? You weren't...
Purely independent. Yeah. In other words, I bought the furniture and equipped 2 floors at 107 Waverly Place with my own money, and then the engineers and scientists and technologists that I had associated with me in World War I, they went out of work, you see. And a whole lot of them bunked in there and worked a day or two and go look for work or write letters for the rest of the time.
And what about the association with the IWW? Was that later?
Oh, that was
That
way
was-
later as the Technical Alliance. See? Our association was simply that we undertook to provide them information on several industries. But our bigger job was with the Railroad Brotherhood, somewhat similar to what are in his books. What would you call it? What? Look out. Goes over on tape. Yeah? What are you doing?
More volume.
Well, that would be the... Simply when I turn away from the mic, you see, you got it up too high now. Just that when I turn away from the mic, this is so sensitive. Pardon me, go ahead with that question.
What kind of course? I think Dorfman said that Veblen gave a course in which he treated the ideas that he used in those dial articles.
Oh, no, not at all.
He didn't.
No. And then he wrote this cockeyed thing about the Soviet technicians, which we jumped him for. He had no more idea, Veblen had, of a technological structure than Susie Q on Broadway did. I mean, he had an inquiring mind, and he had a interesting sense of humor, but he wasn't trained from the technical side. I think I'm the only person that ever kept Veblen up till after 3 o'clock in the morning. He stayed at my place, along with all the others, till after 3 in the morning.
And did you discuss the idea of the
Well, we had a series of dinners and luncheons. Somewhere at the Columbia Club, that's the downtown, on 43rd Street. And, what was the name of Robinson? He came and sat in the corner. He was a professor, and he wrote The Mind in the Making from taking notes at the meeting.
Oh, his name is Robinson?
Huh? They don't say anything about that.
No, I haven't come across that at all.
Oh, yeah, that's typical of when they want to mess up something. No, I never was a member of the IWW.
No, it just, I guess
No.
it was mentioned in newspaper articles that you did a research project for the IWW.
Well, we did for Jet Lout, the economist in Washington, D.C., and the Railroad Brotherhood. Now, what we supplied was information on the structure of the meatpacking industry, the copper, and the agricultural. See, what we pointed out to them that in the report is that they were attempting to organize the migratory worker, and that there were about 1,200 combines in Kansas at the time. And we pointed out the migratory worker wouldn't exist in a few years when you got 15,000 migratory workers, or combines. Well, the combines went to about 27,000, and there were no migratory workers. Now, up until that meeting in the faculty club, now that's long before the new school.
Was that in 1918 still?
That's the winter of 1918. Fall of 1918. I had never met Veblen, I never read him. Now, Veblen his association with the new school was through the, Mrs. Whitney put up the $5,000 a year for simply to keep Veblen.
Do you know what kind of course he was giving at that time?
Oh, he was
What a concern.